Siyalocha Thobela Bonjour Asante Same Shalala. It's a very good evening to you, Mzansi Africa. Welcome to it. It's a special edition of the Sweet Sunday Stories. It is what it is. That's the way it is. Welcome to it, wherever you are, all over, around the world. Thank you so much for streaming with us on www.lxfm.co.za. Tonight is the night. It is what it is. That's the way it is. My distinguished guest, tonight we are rolling along with the one and the only the renegade rebel with a cause. The renegade rebel with a cause. Mzansi Africa, we introduce you Carl Mpangazitga Niehaus, the president of ARETA, African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance. In conversation with us, it's a very good evening to you, Mzansi Africa, and to all of you around the world. Welcome to it. It's a sweet Sunday stories. Muntu Mbanjwa is my name, and what's yours? Wow, what a pretty cold Sunday night. It's one of those Sunday nights, but nevertheless, I guess because the Boke has made us proud there, so we are still enjoying the Boke fever there. It's a very good evening to you, Comrade Mpangazitga. Thank you so much. Welcome to our Sunday storytelling. How are you, Comrade?
Good evening, Comrade Muntu, if I may call you Comrade.
It is a honor.
And it is an honor for me to be back here at Alex FM and to be on your show.
Thank you.
I've always enjoyed being here, and we always have very frank conversations.
Absolutely. Hopefully we're going to have another cozy conversation tonight. It's quite pretty cold. The last Sunday of the month, I don't know whether we are experiencing a cold front for the whole week, or maybe it's just for 2 days. Sunday, it's quite pretty cold. What do you think? Do you think are we going to see a cold front coming the whole week?
Well, I'm not a weather forecaster, you know, I'm a politician.
Okay.
But, yeah, I think the cold weather tells us something.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells us that, yes, the Springboks may have won in France, in Paris,
Yeah.
but it's not all okay in South Africa.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't fool ourselves with that victory, as if now things in South Africa have suddenly, miraculously, overnight, turned into a beautiful, cozy situation. No, it hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised that there are so many South Africans who seem to be uncritical in their excitement about the victory of the Springboks.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is because there's so much that goes wrong in South Africa that South Africans really want to just reach out to anything that looks as if it's going right, and then they want to get excited about it. But honestly, we must be careful to be too excited about the Springbok victory. After all, even if you just looked at the 3 games in which they played, they won every time only with 1 point. But okay, beyond that, we need to look at whether Springbok rugby has really been transformed.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves if a rugby team where there's only 10% of the rugby players that are black and African, when there's 85% and more of the population of this country that are black, whether that rugby team is transformed. And then you must ask yourself whether the South African Rugby Union is a transformed organization. My view is that it's not.
Not yet, yeah.
My view is that Springbok Rugby continues to be first and foremost an articulation of still Afrikaner nationalism and Afrikaner arrogance. And Kolisi and the others who are in that team to a large extent are there to give it the kind of indication, sugarcoating it, indeed, as if it is now a transformed team, which it isn't.
And we know very well that it's going to take quite a long time to have more of Siya Kolisis of this world. So for now, we have one Siya Kolisi, but I just wonder how long is it going to take us to have 10 or 20 of the Siya Kolisis of this world in coming years.
Of course. And, you know, I'm surprised that there are some South Africans and even some people who have expected better from, like my own Comrade Ace Magashule. I saw today he was trending saying, "Go, Bokke, go."
Go, Bokke, go, Bokke.
And I say, yes, perhaps you are looking for some relevance. Perhaps you want to be with it. But if you want to be with it, you should do a proper analysis of the politics and the economic situation in this country. I see Siya Kolisi says in some of his interviews that this is an indication that young people in South Africa can do anything and go anywhere. Well, that's not true. The economic situation in South Africa prevent the vast majority of young black South Africans from reaching their full potential. And we must understand that that is the situation. I'm not saying that we should undermine what the victory is, and we shouldn't be excited that at least on the rugby field South Africa is still able to score in some way. But we need to be able to analyze the reality of what South Africa is today, and that South Africa doesn't, as Siya Kolisi says, provide opportunities for all young black South Africans. I don't want young black South Africans to lose hope. In fact, I would prefer them to have hope, but realistic hope, and an understanding that the only way in which we're going to be able to change things if we change this economy. We fundamentally transform this economy. We address the issues about the lack of black economic empowerment. We address the issues about all the state-owned enterprises that are now being broken up, mismanaged, and privatized.
Now,
all of those things are challenges, Muntu, that must be addressed. But I want to make one more point before you come in.
All right.
We must not underestimate the media propaganda around the Springbok victory, which is propaganda that is meant to promote the current establishment in South Africa, the Ramaphosa government, which is a comprador, supportive government of white monopoly capitalism and imperialism. That is how it is presented in the media throughout today. That this establishment is supposedly doing well while it's a total disaster. That's why Ramaphosa was so excited to jump up and down as if he himself was on the rugby field and try and push up the World Cup, the Ellis Cup into the air. But at the end of the day, we must be very careful to look at this as a victory for the whole of South Africa. It's a victory for the current establishment of South Africa. It is a victory for the Johan Ruperts and those people. Those companies also...
It's not a victory for the majority of black South Africans in particular.
That make those beautiful green, Springbok shirts and things. Those companies are mostly owned by Johan Rupert and by the Stellenbosch Mafia. So while our black South Africans, in their excitement to want to feel good about South Africa, go and buy hundreds of thousands, if not millions of those T-shirts, they're making the white monopoly Afrikaner capitalists of Stellenbosch rich. So, when we do things and when we get ourselves easily excited, it is so important that we sometimes just take a step back and analyze what is happening and how we are sometimes also being manipulated and played by the mainstream media.
Now, what is your perception about many South Africans, I mean, we have seen what many South Africans have been saying about the fever, the World Cup fever, even alluding to the fact that going back to 2006, when they first won the World Cup, it was back then. You were the chief guy, the spokesperson of the former global icon Nelson Mandela, by the way. Yeah. So now, what is your perception about people saying that the winning of the Amabogo has united the nation? So this is about the Rainbow Nation. And I'm still asking this question again and again, that are we, I mean, I'm looking at the people, you know, supporting Amabogo. It's like we are really a Rainbow Nation. But the question that I want to ask to you, Comrade Carl, is this: are we a nation yet? Are we a Rainbow Nation? Or it's just a far-fetched dream? It's still a long way to go. I mean, you look at the people, the celebration all over South Africa, particularly black Africans, rallying behind Amapogo, even praising them that they're doing far much better than our local boys, Bafana. Even young people in the rural areas, those who don't even have the sports facilities to play rugby, but they were all over the show, praising Amapogo and all of that. People posting the emblems of the Amapogo. So many people still believe that we are a Rainbow Nation. Are we in Rainbow Nation? Are we a nation yet? Or still a long way to go? What to that Madiba Rainbow Nation? The Madiba dream. I'm thinking of, people think of the World Cup has been won because of the Madiba magic. You still remember the Madiba magic? Yeah. So because of the Madiba magic, people still believe that the Madiba magic is part and parcel. It's synonymous with unity. Sports bring people together. Sports brings unity. So are we united as Africans, as South Africans? Are we a Rainbow Nation? Because people think so, tend to believe so, that we are a Rainbow Nation. You know, that's how they were celebrating. But do you believe, are we a Rainbow Nation? The Madiba Rainbow Nation?
That Rainbow Nation idea, which Madiba and Desmond Tutu was pushing so hard, it's a mirage. It never came alive. As you say, I was the spokesperson of the African National Congress when Madiba walked onto Ellis Park, and he had put on that jersey with a 6 behind it. Interestingly enough, the same 6 that Kulusi is wearing now. Then it was the 6 of the then captain
Francois
Pienaar. But Muntu, it was a lie that was told to our people.
It was a lie.
Because, you see, unity and a combination of people coming together can never be brought together.
Is it a process?
Just on a promise that something will happen. It has to be brought together on economic justice.
Right.
It has to be brought together on the fact that the black South African living in Soweto or living in Yanga or Langa or Guguletu or any of the camps must be able to have the same opportunities that the white South African has. There must be an even playing field. There must be a real effort to make it possible for black South Africans to be empowered in the economy of this country, to have jobs. For young black South Africans, also those who do manage to get an education, who do manage to go to university, that they will get jobs. The reality is that none of that exists. The chance that you will get a job as a black South African compared to the chance of getting a job as a white South African, there's still a huge gap. The biggest benefactors of the change that happened in 1994, when democracy, or so-called democracy, dawned on South Africa, were not the majority of black Africans in South Africa, but still the whites. Those whites who were the benefactors of the apartheid system. After apartheid was now supposedly gotten rid of, and I say very deliberately supposedly, because I don't believe we have come to an end of apartheid. We'll actually live a new apartheid state in South Africa. But those whites were the ones that benefited from the opening of the economy, who benefited from the increase in ability to travel internationally.
And they're still benefiting
and they
in
are
this
continuing
dispensation.
to benefit. And in fact, the reality is that the gap between the rich and the poor, and also the gap between the rich white and the majority of black South Africans, has not narrowed. It has grown bigger and bigger, to the point where today we are the most unequal society in the world, with the highest youth unemployment figures in the world, the highest murder rate, the highest rape rates. Now that is not a rainbow nation. That is a disaster. And the majority of black South Africans are not living in a dream of a rainbow nation.
Yeah.
They're living in the nightmare of economic Africa used. Also that same mist that just
note. From where you are sitting, Comrade Mpangazitga, in a way that is going to benefit all of us, level the playing field to make sure that how should this economy be structured so that it benefits all of us equally.
Muntu, at the foundation of any economic restructuring in our country must be the return of the land to the people. You see, when you want to analyze what is wrong in South Africa, you need to do it in an economic, historical context. How did the majority of black and African people end up in this situation of lack of economic power and of exploitation? Because the majority of indigenous people in this country lost their land. Because it is the land that provides the opportunity to create business, to farm, to build wealth. It is on the land that you need to build a future for yourself. And when your land is taken away from you, then it means that you are economically being subjugated. One of the biggest mistakes, in fact, I want to call it a fundamental sin that was created in the negotiations, which was led by Cyril Ramaphosa, was that clause in the constitution that was agreed to protect property rights. Because remember, those property rights belong to whites.
Yeah.
And those whites got those properties by having stolen the land at gunpoint from the majority of black South Africans.
Right.
So the first thing, the land must be nationalized, and then the land must be returned to the people.
So, but why has it taken so long for the President Ramaphosa's government to return the land to its rightful owners? I mean, they've been in power now for 30 years.
Because
but now, what is the hold-up here?
They had no intention to do
Is there a lack of political will to do so?
There's a lack of political, but actually also economic will to do so. Because remember,
until when?
Ramaphosa was negotiating a settlement which had to protect the economic interests of the whites and of imperialism.
Yeah.
If you look at the whole way in which the constitution was negotiated and finally written, that was the intention. That is why it's not just about the issue of the land. When you asked me the question, I wanted to add into it. Why is the South African Reserve Bank still controlled through minority private shareholders? Because the Reserve Bank should be an instrument for economic growth. The Reserve Bank should be an instrument for making money available to the majority of black South Africans so that there can be growth.
That should be the
so
mandate.
that there can be job creation, so that the majority of black South Africans will have access to relatively cheap money. But that was agreed not to be done. Why? Because if you do that, you will empower black South Africans and you will put at risk the continuing control of the white monopoly capitalist power in this country. Why was Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the people's public protector, who was impeached? I can tell you why.
Why?
Because of the question that she asked very early on in her term as public protector. Why is the mandate of the South African Reserve Bank so narrow that it only concentrates on inflation targeting? Why doesn't the Reserve Bank also have a mandate to create economic growth and empowerment for the majority of black South Africans? From the moment that she raised that question and made a recommendation in her report about the Sussex matter, that the Reserve Bank's mandate should be changed. From that moment, she became enemy number one, because that proposal was attacking the core of the control that the white monopoly capitalists continue to have over this economy. And from that moment on, the servant of those white monopoly capitalists, Cyril Ramaphosa, together with the Democratic Alliance, had one target, and that was to get rid of Advocate Mkhwebane, because she was challenging one of the essential building stones on which they built this unequal economy, on which they built also the Constitution. That, where in the world have you heard that you actually put in the Constitution a definition which describes and which narrows the work of the Reserve Bank? Nowhere else in the world do you have such a situation. In other places in the world, which also have banks that are nationally owned, that Reserve Bank has a much broader mandate. And in many countries, it has a mandate also for economic growth. But here it was deliberately done that the South African Reserve Bank's mandate had to be narrowed to the point that it could not influence the empowerment of the majority of black and African South Africans. And then the next point. Why do we allow our state-owned enterprises to be destroyed?
Okay.
I have spoken before in one of the interviews that you and I had about the role in which state-owned enterprises played in South Africa in the upliftment of the poor whites, the poor Afrikaners.
Can I chip in
And I
there?
said, no, I just want to make this point quickly. And
Okay.
I said, why don't we narrow that objective and make sure that state-owned enterprises can in fact help to empower the majority of black South Africans? But instead, we take one of the most important instruments for the empowerment, for job creation of black South Africans away. We privatize it, and we allow the private companies to make super profits out of the privatization process of state-owned enterprises. Look what happened with SAA. SAA was sold, Muntu, for
56 cents.
No, 51 rand.
Oh, 51 rand, yeah.
And you know what the asset base was when it was audited and calculated? 13.5 billion rands. So Pravin Gordon's friends that made up the consortium,
Who's
that
the
bought
Zakato consortium?
the Takato consortium,
Who are these
that
guys?
bought that SAA for 51 rands,
yeah.
got the value of 13.5 billion rands. If you go back into the background, the people who are sitting there
What do you
are
make
the
of
friends of Pravin Gordon, very close associates of
Derek
him.
Hanekom, your former comrade? He's sitting there as a chair of the SAA.
Well, can you imagine?
Yeah. Now, I want to hear your take. Let me start about the state-owned enterprises. They are very paralyzed. We have seen recently the resignation. I'm going to talk about the resignation, the exodus of the chief executive officers in the state-owned enterprises, starting with the CEO of Eskom, Paul Makwana, has stepped down. You have Cesar Mzimela, of Transnet. She has also stepped down. And you have Popo Molefe, the chairperson of PRASA, has also stepped down, and others, just to mention a few. What does that signify about this exodus of resignation of these CEOs in those paralyzed state-owned enterprise? What does it tell us? And the Minister Gwede Mantashe, he tweeted saying something that which I wouldn't like to repeat it, but it was something that had to do with why these guys are just living like that. It seems something is going on there. Firstly, it was the chairman of ESCOM, Pomakwana. You had PRASA chairperson, Popo Molefe, stepping down, Cesar Mzimela from Transnet and others. So the whole list, I'm sure others will follow.
CEO of Transnet.
Yeah, the CEO of Transnet, Cesar Mzimela there. She was also, she was before with the SAA. So quite a number of them. I think there's another one, who also resigned in Dinel and others as well. What does it tell us? And why are these CEO resigning? What's your take on that? What do you make of that?
Muntu, I believe
Is there smoke?
Well, of course, there's not just smoke. There's a huge fire. And the reality is that black
CEO.
managers and chief executives are being undermined by the government. They are not being given the opportunity to carry out their work. We consistently hear about the interference from the Ministry of Public Enterprises, and very specifically from Pravin Gordhan, in what is happening. Remember what happened also with the DG of the Department of Public Enterprises.
Yeah, he resigned as well.
He raised concerns specifically with regards to the SAA. And what happened? He was haunted and pushed out. Pravin Gordhan is a power unto his own. He is very close to Cyril Ramaphosa. In fact, I believe Gordhan pulls the strings in many ways that control Cyril Ramaphosa. And there's a long history to that. You know, I watched the role Gordhan played during the writing of the South African Constitution. Remember, Ramaphosa was the chair.
With Rolf Meyer.
Yes, he and Rolf Meyer. But when the Constitutional Assembly was formed, Ramaphosa was the chair. But who was the senior manager?
Just Pravin.
Pravin Gordhan.
I remember.
And during that time, I was a member of Parliament. So I was also a member of the Constitutional Assembly. I was 2 offices away from Pravin Gordhan's office in Parliament, in that building that now burned down. I watched the number of big executives of private companies constantly. It was like a revolving door, how they walked in and out of Pravin's office, and how they were making proposals on the Constitution and how it should be formulated. I remember that the then senior executive of Goldman Sachs and the senior executive of Rothschild was often there. They were in and out of there. The Ruperts were there. So what you had was these people had an open door, free access to the people who were making the ultimate decisions of how the Constitution was to be structured. Why did they have that access? Surely it is not natural, it's not logical, because this was supposed to be a liberation movement, caring about the people. But this access was clearly orchestrated.
Who gave them the access?
The access was, of course, given to them by Pravin and by Cyril. If they were not prepared to see them, they would not have seen them. But, of course, they did so because they already were in the pockets of these people. And they were already preparing for themselves their own interests, and they came there right from the beginning as agents of white monopoly capitalism. They were planted. If you go and look at the report, even during the exile years, that came out about the so-called cabal, which was running the show here in South Africa, especially through the Natal Indian Congress. And the report that was published by the ANC, by the way, announced by Comrade Oliver Tambo as the president of the African National Congress. It is still there on Google. You can find it under the O'Malley papers. You should go and read that report, where Pravin Gordhan is exposed as the leader of the cabal. You see, we have such a short memory in this country. I wish we could historically just remind ourselves of what happened in our country. How we were warned by Comrade Oliver Tambo about this cabal. How we were warned by Comrade Oliver Tambo about Pravin Gordhan. But despite that, we allowed this man to continue to play his insidious role before the ANC was unbanned, during the struggle, during the underground, and we allowed him to continue then to be moved into some of the most important decision-making structures during the negotiating process, and we allowed him and Cyril Ramaphosa to determine the final outcome of the Constitution. And that is why we ended up with property rights being protected, why we ended up with the sunset clauses, why we ended up with a constitution. Well, I mean, it was Slovo, yes, together.
The sunset clause.
Slovo was part of that. But you mustn't forget that the first person who used the phrase sunset clauses before Joe Slovo gave it content was in fact Thabo Mbeki. And where did Thabo Mbeki get that phrase from? From Professor Willie Esterhuizen. And may I now connect the dots for you. Recently, at the funeral of Aziz Pahad, Thabo Mbeki was speaking. But there was also a recorded message that was played by Professor Willie Esterhuizen, where Esterhuizen spoke about his many meetings with Esopahad and with Aziz Pahad and with Thabo Mbeki, and how those meetings shaped the initial parameters of what the negotiations were going to be based on. Now, if you understand that history, you begin to understand how we ended up eventually in the manipulated constitution that we finally ended up with. So what I'm saying to you is, yes, it's okay to say that the sunset clauses came from Joe Slovo, because Joe Slovo did give content to it. But the idea of the sunset clauses came from much further. It came from the Afrikaner nationalists, and from their plant, from the Broederbond, that they sent for advance meetings in London with Aziz Pahad, with Esopahad, with Thabo Mbeki, and that was Professor Willie Esterhuizen. Willie Esterhuizen has always been, as a professor of political philosophy at the University of Stellenbosch, an instrument, an agent of the Afrikaner Broederbond. So I'm telling you that those ideas originated there. What was the purpose of the sunset clauses? To make sure that the white administration in South Africa, the civil service of the old apartheid system, would be given an opportunity to continue to stay in their positions, will be able to continue to have an influence on how the South African government is functioning. And the fact of the matter is, although we called it sunset clauses, so-called, the sun has never set on those clauses. And there's never been a sunrise for black managers and for black administration in South Africa. It brings me back to your original question. Why are all these CEOs leaving? Because there's never been a sunrise for them. They have never been empowered. They continue to be subjected to the control of a government which is in the service of white monopoly capitalism. There lies the root of the problem.
Yeah.
That is why I fully agree with Advocate Muzi Sekekane when he says at the root of our problem is the fundamental starting points of this new liberal constitution which is in the service of white monopoly capitalism and imperialism. And the only way we can transform South Africa is to scrap that constitution and to start a process of rewriting the constitution so that it can bring on board the real needs of our people, the empowerment of black South Africans, and we can get rid of the underlying fundamentals that were imposed on us with a long process, as I've told you, which started already before the ANC was unbanned in those initial meetings that took place in Geneva, in London, and all over the place where those ideas were planted, and it was like evil seeds, like weeds, the seeds of weeds that were planted, and they germinated and they grew and they delivered to us this aberration of a constitution which keeps our nation in a straitjacket of political and economic subjugation.
Wow. Wow. Said it mouthfully there. Still in conversation with the president of ARETA, Comrade Carl Mpangazitga. Still talking about the constitution, Comrade Carl. I want to go back to the issue of the Reserve Bank. From my research, I've discovered that it seems like in all the government departments, it's only the Reserve Bank that enjoys the protection of the Constitution.
Exactly.
Why is it so? That is only the Reserve Bank that enjoys the protection of the Constitution more than any other department in the whole government sphere. It's only the Reserve Bank.
Muntu, that's what I was saying earlier. When I said that this constitution defined the role of the Reserve Bank to put it in a place that it will not be able to play the role of economic empowerment and economic growth.
Who are the shareholders there?
And there are these private shareholders, and tragically some of them are not even South Africans. The majority of them are actually foreigners who hold the shares in the Reserve Bank. And the more we tell the South African Reserve Bank governor and the minister, the finance minister, that the Reserve Bank should be nationalized, the more they refuse. And they tell the public a lie.
Yeah.
They say it will cost huge amounts of money to actually buy out those shares and then make sure that it becomes a nationalized South African Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
Utter nonsense. The calculations had been that for a relatively small amount of money, it should be possible to buy out those shares and nationalize the South African Reserve Bank.
It's possible to buy those shares.
But even if we didn't want to buy them, we are the government. If we had the political power,
we have the power.
We could have just nationalized the South African Reserve Bank. There's many other countries
that
have done so.
Even in Britain.
Not just Britain,
Yeah.
Canada, the United States of America, everywhere. All those countries have come to the conclusion that the central banks and the reserve banks ought to be nationalized. The Canadian Prime Minister, when they nationalized the Canadian Central Bank, said it's a matter of national pride and of the sovereignty of Canada, that the Reserve Bank cannot be in private ownership, but it must be in ownership of the state, in national ownership. Now, why are we so different? Why must we now have a private shareholding Reserve Bank? Why must we have a constitution that defines the role of the Reserve Bank so narrow that the only thing it can do is to deal with inflation targeting? that was very deliberate. And that's why I said to you earlier, the reason why Advocate Mngubane had to be removed and eventually impeached was because she put her finger right on that sensitive nerve point of saying the Reserve Bank's mandate ought to be reconsidered. And that was because she also challenged what happened with huge amounts of money that went from ABSA and from the old Volkskas and all of those old Afrikaans banks.
Before the amalgamation.
Exactly. But remember what happened. There was a lifeboat of huge amounts of money given to ABSA by the South African government. That money was never paid back. And when Advocate Mngubane said the money ought to be paid back, and she came back and she had a look at the SAIC's report and she said, but this report is correct and this money should be recovered because this is in fact theft. This is the money of the taxpayer that had been used to give a lifeboat to help ABSA to survive.
So that money was never recovered?
The money was never recovered.
Up till today?
Up to the day that we sit here now. Instead of recovering the money, instead of therefore doing a service to the South African taxpayer, that our money is not used by white Afrikaner capital to be able to continue with the exploitation of our people, the person who tried to deal with it, who tried to stop that, who issued a report saying that the money should be recovered, she was targeted. And now finally she had to be removed, she had to be impeached on that farcical Section 194
and she's
committee in Parliament.
She's the first public protector to be impeached.
And she was the most successful public protector. You forget that she had 3 years in a row a clean audit. There was no other public protector in the history of South Africa since 1994 that had even 1 year of a clean audit. Advocate Mngubane managed to deal with 96% of all the complaints that were brought to her by the public and by other institutions. That is the highest figure of success of managing and coming out with reports on complaints. The empowerment that she gave to local communities throughout South Africa is unsurpassed. Therefore, the most successful public protector, the person with the best record and the most competent public protector that we had since 1994 was removed. Why? Because she was challenging the establishment. She was challenging the way in which the constitution that came out of CODESA was manipulated and written to continue to protect the capitalist interests that ran South Africa before 1994 and at all and every cost had to continue to run South Africa after 1994 up to this very day.
Let's go back from 1994 up till now, 2023. From the first democratically elected president, from Nelson Mandela to President Mbeki to Malala, the former president, and to the current president. Now, from where we are sitting, Comrade Mpangazitha, from President Mandela to President Mbeki to President Zuma and President Ramaphosa, among the 4 presidents, this presidency, these 4 presidents, which one would you say has the best record so far, has delivered to South Africans? From Mandela to Mbeki to Zuma to Ramaphosa. So which president do you think has delivered more than any of them? 4 of them, from Mandela, Mbeki, Zuma and Cyril. So which one would you rate the best, with the best track record that we can attest to that since the inception of our democracy. It's
And-
30 years now. So, out of these 4 presidents, which one would you rate the best of the best?
Unequivocally, President Jacob Zuma.
Tell us more.
President Zuma created more
Millionaires,
but not just millionaires. You know, that is the glib way of saying it.
as they say.
The development of small and medium-sized businesses and the empowerment of black entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
More of them than any other president. President Zuma built more universities and tertiary education facilities in this country than any other president. He had the largest infrastructural development program and road building program
Yeah.
that we had seen in the full 30 years of this democracy. He managed to change the financial institutions in a way that they started to give easier money and empowerment to black and especially young black entrepreneurs. You will recall the legislation that were passed that said government has to give to young and upcoming black entrepreneurs a particular percentage of work, a particular percentage of the availability of tenders without holding back. That legislation is now being rolled back. Remember how it is being rolled back, because it was challenged by Solidarity, it was challenged by AfriForum,
Yeah.
and what did Cyril Ramaphosa do?
Mm.
He folded his arms and he said, yeah, I think they're correct.
Why you think so?
You know, I was at a conference where young women black entrepreneurs 2 years ago were speaking. And there was a woman who stood up and she started crying. And she said, you know, under President Zuma, I grew my business. I started to see a future for myself. I even started to think of the possibility of building my business from a medium-sized business to a bigger business. I've lost everything. And she screamed, this government doesn't care for us as black people.
So why are they talking about during President Zuma's term? They often talk about these 9 wasted years. What are they trying to tell us here? How do you define that? Describe that 9 wasted years to us. How does it look
How
like?
must I describe that, Muntu? It's a load of rubbish. I told you just now that the most successful period of black empowerment, of the empowerment of young black entrepreneurs in the history, the short history of this country since democracy dawned, was under President Zuma.
But comrade,
So there is no 9 wasted years, except that those who wanted to continue with their project of control of South Africa and super exploitation felt it was 9 wasted years for them, because they could not continue with that exploitation as they wished. And that is why they acted as strongly as they did against President Zuma. Just look at one example, Muntu. What Brian Molefe did in Eskom.
yeah, there was no load shedding, of course, during Brian Molefe's term.
Brian stopped load shedding,
Yeah,
but
there
the
was no
most
load shedding.
important thing that Brian did was to go and look at the supply chain within Eskom and say, but what is going on with companies such as Glencore
Glencore, yeah.
and others? Why do they have these evergreen contracts?
Yes.
44 years,
Yes, yeah, for
super
life.
profits,
Yeah, evergreen contracts for life.
extraordinary huge and high prices being paid
Yeah,
for coal.
For coal, yeah.
And Brian said, I'm going to stop this.
We're going to charge less.
I'm
compared
going
what?
to pay less,
Yeah.
and I'm going to make it competitive. You know, we hear all the time about the Guptas and the mines that the Guptas had. But some of those mines started to become a challenge to these big white monopoly capitalist mines. And some of those mines begin to disrupt this cozy relationship that these companies had with Eskom. So that's why Brian had to be challenged and eventually targeted and removed.
And what about Matsela Koko?
Of course, it's the same story. I'm just referring to Brian as an example. Machalo Koko, excellent engineer,
Yeah.
someone who, if you listen to him today, speak with great understanding
Absolutely.
of how the electricity
Energy is-
supply
yeah.
sector in South Africa
Absolutely.
functions.
Yeah.
But the tragedy is that very competent black managers such as Mashalo Koko, Brian Molefe, are today unemployed. They're sitting at home. And in the meantime, we had nonsense such as that white CEO that had been appointed to Eskom. Remember?
You mean Andrew de Ruyter?
Yeah, the writer. But
Talking-
remember what...
How
but
why
let
was
me
he not
remind you.
vetted then?
I don't know.
He was
Because
never
he
vetted,
came
but they allowed him to work.
came-
I mean, he was a CEO for 3 years. How come he was never
came
vetted?
from Nampak.
Yeah.
He ran Nampak into the ground. He came from Nampak on the recommendation from Titu Mboweni, who was, by the way, during the same time that the Reuter ran Nampak into the ground, was the chairman of the Nampak board.
Nampak board, yeah.
So here comes the Reuter with a history of running companies into the ground, dismembering and selling them off. That is what he was doing at Nampak.
He was never vetted. Even
I know he
apart
was
from
never
that,
vetted, but you know why he was
why he
brought?
was never, yeah,
He
why?
was brought there to come and do the same he did at Nampak.
to bring Eskom
Eskom.
down.
To bring Eskom down, to divide it, to cut it to pieces, and eventually to privatize it. And you can see in what he now subsequently wrote in his book that he was busy with that project. But because of all kinds of pressures, it became difficult for him because he was also mismanaging the whole process to finally carry out that job.
Do you support Commissioner for Inquiry into Corruption at Eskom?
Of course.
Do you?
Yes. But then you need to look into corruption of all kinds. You know what I don't want to see is the kind of nonsense that we have seen with the inquiry into state capture, where you use the idea of corruption not in order to clean out, but to create a false narrative of what happens with regards to corruption, and then to use that so-called fight against corruption to target your political opponents. I've got nothing against an inquiry into corruption which is driven by the real principle of wanting to deal with corruption. But in South Africa, we have seen how corruption is weaponized in order to target certain people while others are being left totally off the hook.
Yeah.
So if there's going to be a commission of inquiry into corruption to Eskom,
Yeah.
my main concern is, in the current environment, is it going to be possible to have a proper, fair, even-handed commission? Or is it just going to be another witch hunt and inquisition?
Yeah. You spoke about the former president, Msholozi, that this is the man that has done so much for South Africa. I mean, the record speaks for itself. Now, the question is, if indeed he has done so much for the people of South Africa, the record speaks for itself, it was never about the 9 wasted years, then why, at the late hours of his life, a man who has sacrificed so much to bring about this liberation or this freedom that some of us are enjoying today. But then why is he hated so much? He's the only ANC president that has been ever so much hated and is even now being prosecuted. Why is he the only president in the history of the ANC so far that is the only president in the history of the ANC that has to face the court of the law? He's being prosecuted. He's been behind bars. The narrative that has been created. We've seen what happened during the covert operation, but we don't see that happening now. We have seen white people for the very first time in the history of the democracy of South Africa, white people coming out, toy-toying, gathering there at the church square to say, Zuma must go, Zuma must go. You remember that?
I remember those old grannies dancing.
Yeah, these old grannies from the so-called covert operation and all of that. But we don't see that happening anymore. We don't see those old grannies doing to say we are tired of corruption and all of that. But it seems it was only meant for one man to play by the rules. So the million-dollar question that we ask Mpangazitha is this. Why is it, why is it only one man that must play by the rule? It's only President Zuma that goes to court.
Well,
so many cases, 700 charges and so much, you can name it. Now the question is this, why this man is so much hated? Why they keep on wanting to prosecute him?
Let's start.
What is it that he has done wrong to deserve this?
Muntu, let's start with that phrase you used. Let's play by the rules.
Yeah.
Because they are not playing by the rules.
It's only one man that must play by the rule.
No, but President Zuma is being subjected to what I call Zuma Law.
Yeah.
There's one set of laws for the rest of South Africa. And then there's law for President Zuma. President Zuma can be brought in front of the Constitutional Court, and without a trial, just on a procedure, he can be sentenced to 15 months of imprisonment. President Zuma can be facing all these charges for 23 years of the so-called arms deal case.
Yeah.
While there is clearly no evidence, while the main so-called star witness that the state says they have, which is Patricia de Lille,
no, she's the one who blew the whistle, by the way.
But then she's even acknowledged that she doesn't really have much to say. She said, well, all I heard was hearsay. The star witness in a trial of the arms deal case that has been going on for 23 years acknowledges that the evidence that they want to use against President Zuma is hearsay.
Who are the people behind this?
Of course, it is the same establishment that created that constitution that saw in President Zuma the danger that he was going to undo their plans. Remember, they had it nicely worked out. They managed to control and manage President Mandela. Under Thabo Mbeki, the new liberal economic policy, everything was running smoothly.
Yeah.
They didn't use, the ANC didn't use its 2/3 majority to change the constitution.
It had a chance there.
To get rid of Section 25 of the constitution.
Why did they never use that? The 2/3 majority, why?
They were already totally under the control of these white monopoly capitalists.
My sweet Jesus.
Remember that the reason why Chris Hani had to die is because they were scared that Chris had such a level of popularity amongst the people of South Africa that his popularity would bring him on a wave into the presidency. And they feared that he was going to undo their plans.
So then why they were...
So now wait, came, and they didn't plan this. Remember, Thabo had no plan. He even acknowledged it to ever make President Zuma the president of this country.
Oh, yeah.
But on the basis of President Zuma's resilience, on his own process of fighting back after Thabo Mbeki also fired him, he managed to come in on that coalition of people who were disaffected by Thabo Mbeki and by the way in which Gear was going. At that time, COSATU and the SHCP at least still had some semblance of a backbone and some commitment to communism and socialism.
They were behind President Zuma.
So then President Zuma came in Polokwane. That was a huge upset. That was a red flag
To the
these establishment, the white monopoly
And then
capitalists.
Mbeki camp.
Why do you think President Mbeki, at his age, at Polokwane, suddenly felt he had to oppose President Zuma for the presidency of the ANC?
Why did he do that?
Because he was pushed by that establishment, because they said to him, we cannot allow Jacob Zuma and what he represents to come in as president. And, you know, I watched it closely, Muntu, from the moment that President Zuma came into power. He was under attack.
Yeah.
He was not to be given the space to implement his ideas. He was not to be given the space to bring about that fundamental transformation that he was hoping for. President Zuma achieved what he achieved under the most difficult circumstances. I've never seen another president, not just in South Africa, but actually throughout the world, perhaps with a comparison with Lula in Brazil. One can say
Lula da
he was
Silva.
treated in a similar way. Because Lula da Silva
He had to go
also
he went to
stood
prison
up against
and went to
the
prison and came
establishment.
back.
He was also fighting for the same kind of ideals that President Zuma was fighting for. But President Zuma was controlled. He was put in a straitjacket. He wasn't given a moment of freedom to do what he wanted to do. He wasn't given the space to breathe. From the moment he became president, he was under attack.
Yeah.
And let me remind you, remember that phone call that was played, the recording, which they later on tried to discredit, but they could never really discredit it, of Leonard McCarthy,
Yeah.
who was
And
saying,
Bulelani Nguga.
Bulelani Nguka was then the head of the NPA,
NPA then, I remember.
and they were saying to each other, oh, Zuma is now going to be the president of the ANC.
Got to use that.
Let us decide on what the most damaging moment will be to bring the charges against him and prosecute him,
That's why they came up with the arms deal.
so that we can get rid of him. And then they came up with the arms deal case. And go and look at some of the phone calls that happened between Bulelani Nguka
And Leonard McCartney.
not just Leonard McCarthy,
And
also Saki Makozoma.
Makozoma, yeah.
And Saki Makozoma phones Bulelani Nguka and Leonard McCarthy and said, why are you guys so slow?
Yeah.
We should have gotten rid of this Zulu boy peasant. Those are the words Saki Makozoma used. We should have gotten rid of this Zulu boy peasant long ago. Now, this was what President Zuma had to face right from the moment that he became the president of this country. And they didn't rest. Remember what they did? They created the so-called Save South African campaign. They had all the money that came in from the United States of America, from the Open Society Foundation of George Soros.
Yeah.
All of those guys were funding these civil society organizations, sham civil society organizations that were simply put up to fight President Zuma. The moment President Zuma was removed and Cyril Ramaphosa, through the billion and plus rands that were used in the 2017 conference of the ANC, the 54th National Conference. What happened to the Save South Africa campaign? Where are all those people, as you say, those grannies who were dancing, all of those civil society organizations? They all disappeared. It was all a pseudo false setup. There was never real roots in the South African society. And it was driven by media and propaganda from the mainstream media.
Yeah. So I want you to explain to us what was your understanding about the comments that were made by Bulelani Nguka himself when he said the case against President Zuma it's unwinnable. What he meant by saying so, that the case it's unwinnable in the court of law.
Remember what he said.
That's
He
Bulelani Nguka
was
himself.
playing propaganda.
When you said the case was unwinnable.
No. He said there is a prima facie case. Remember very well. He did a private briefing with some journalists, which then head of the NPA should never be doing. He was doing a propaganda job. He was maneuvering to make President Zuma look as bad as possible, but at the same time, already at that point, he acknowledged that actually we don't have enough
sufficient evidence,
facts and evidence
to
be able to proceed.
Yeah.
But
they were under pressure.
he went behind the scenes to start a propaganda campaign
in the media.
He privately briefed certain editors.
Oh, yes. I
In
remember
order-
that meeting.
Yes.
When
yes.
he even told them that they must put their pens down, their writing pens. This is off the record meeting with
But
editors.
that was a load of poppycock,
Yeah.
because Bulelani Nguka was playing the game.
With
At
the
the same
editors of the
time-
newspapers.
At
then.
the same time, he was making it possible for those editors to go out and bring the anti-Zuma propaganda. So what he was doing is he was coming out with a vicious media propaganda campaign
yeah.
against President Zuma,
yeah.
but he wanted his cake and eat it. So at the same time, as a legal person, he was trying to protect himself by saying it may not be a winnable case.
Okay. all
But
right.
actually, prima facie,
evidence.
President Zuma is guilty. That was the message that was being delivered.
Now, lately, the case has been going on for almost 23 years now. But now, can you just take us into confidence, actually, what does it mean, the private prosecution of the state advocate Billy Downer and the journalist Karen Mon there? Do you certainly believe, indeed, they did leak those medical reports?
Of course they did. Where else did
There
those
is
reports
a prima
come from?
facie evidence. Is there
Where
is
did
there
those
is a prima
reports
facie
come from? That report
from Karen
was
Mon?
No. But you must follow the whole line of communication. That information was in the hands of Billy Downer.
As a
He had access to it as the legal practitioner, acting as the advocate of the state
He had access by law.
by law.
Okay.
But by law, you're not allowed to make such privileged information. And remember
To divulge.
that a person's medical records
It's
are private.
confidential, yeah.
It's confidential. It should not be divulged.
All right.
There is no doubt at all. It's not even
That
being
Billy Downer
disputed
leaked
that Billy Downer gave
Karen Mon
those documents, President Zuma's medical reports,
to Karen Mon.
to Karen Mon, and that Karen Mon, and it's a fact because she published them, we know she published them. So President Zuma has an absolute 100% watertight case to say Billy Downer acted illegally. And Karen Mon acted illegally by publishing those documents because she should have known that those documents are private medical documents.
And she knows the journalist
And
ethics.
it is an outrage that President Zuma and Advocate Dali Mpofu has to battle as they do to get such a clear-cut case
But
dealt
why?
with by our courts.
Why are they saying President Zuma's defense team, Advocate Tawane Masuku and Senior Counsel Dalimpofu, they're using delaying tactics? What do they mean by saying delaying tactics?
No,
of
they're
this
not
case?
using delaying tactics. I've been in the court all the time.
And who are these friends of the court?
They are crystal clear about their position, but these friends of the court is, of course, brought in to try and muddy the waters
Okay.
and undermine the case, because what they want is that this matter should never be brought against Billy Downer, because if Billy Downer is found guilty, as he very much should be, he will immediately have to stop being the main prosecutor in this case. And Downer has been right from the beginning of this case at the center of it. Downer has been part of that manipulation
What is his motive?
of this case. Let me just finish this point. He was part of the manipulation of this case through what was happening with Bulelani Nguka, what was happening
Leonard McCartney,
with McCartney, all of them.
Makazome and all of that.
So Downer obviously has a vested interest as the lawyer
Yeah.
to continue to prosecute
Execute
President Zuma.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's all kinds of links between him and all these different power interests that want President Zuma out. And this is the reality that we're faced with. And that is why President Zuma is absolutely correct to say that Downer must either recuse himself
Yeah.
or he must be removed as the prosecutor in the case because he's got malfeasance.
So how does the
He
president
has
come
clearly proved himself to be
a delinquent?
a person who has got an unbalanced and malicious approach to this case, and that he wants at any cost to destroy President Zuma. Now you ask me, how does the
How
president
does the
come-
president been dragged into this one?
No,
Yeah.
he's not dragged in, he dragged himself in.
He dragged himself in
Because the president was approached
by
by
Billy Downer.
Billy Downer and by the NPA,
Yeah.
and the president did not act. The president allowed this situation to continue. So President Zuma is correct
With
to
the
say,
private
I've got
prosecution
a case against Billy Downer and Karen Moon,
and the president.
and I have a case against President Cyril Ramaphosa because President Ramaphosa, through his non-action, while he knew what was going on, allowed this situation to continue, and therefore it is clear that he had a vested interest to want this case to proceed at all cost, even at the cost of him not carrying out his clear duty that he should have had to act when it was known to him that these people had acted in a wrong way.
Yeah. Another thing, Comrade Mpangazitga, former President Zuma has always said that he wanted his day in court. And then he has his side of the story to tell. Now, my question is, when is President Zuma going to tell his side of the story? I mean, he's been to court for so many years. I mean, really, it's tiring. But my question is that he once said he wants his day in court. Fine, he's in court now. But now, when is he going to tell his side of the story to say, this is what really happened? I'm innocent here. I was never involved. Because some of us can come to think that, I mean, when you look at the case itself, the arms deal, by then, when it started, President Zuma was an MMEC of economic development in KZN. In KwaZulu-Natal. He was an MEC by then of finance and economic development. So my question to President Ubaba Msholozi to say, when Mr. President, hopefully is listening in Kandla there, when is he going to tell his side of the story? To say, I have a constitutional right to tell my side of the story. Apart from the Karen Moon and Billy Downer medical reports and all of that, but he's been implicated so many times. And some of these charges, we know for the fact, some of us, that those charges were trumped up charges. But my question to the former president is, when is he going to tell his side of the story, to tell South Africa and the world to say, this is what I know? He went to the Zondo Commission, but he never had enough chance to tell his side of the story. But now he's got a chance because he's in the court of law. So I'm asking Mpangazitga that, in your own personal perception, when do you think the time is right for the former president to tell his side of the story once and for all, rather than doing all these private prosecutions? He's got his day in court, but now he needs to be afforded the opportunity to tell his side of the story. even if it takes the whole day. When is he going to do that? Tell
Muntu,
his story.
Let's start that President Zuma has got the right
Yeah.
to exhaust all the legal avenues available to him.
Yeah.
That is what the law provides.
That's his constitutional right.
And he is entitled to do so. So this rubbish to say when he follows all the legal avenues that are available to him that he's busy with so-called Stalingrad or
Tactics.
delaying tactics
Tactics,
is
yeah.
nonsense.
Mm.
Every one of us
Yes.
as South African citizens have those rights. And if you or I were in a court and we were faced with this situation, we would also have exhausted all
avenues.
our legal rights and avenues. But I want to ask you another question. Do you believe, in the context of what I've just described to you, the manipulation of this case from the beginning, the role that Bulelani Nguka played, that McCarthy played, that Billy Downer played, and continues to play, and all the negative publicity, all the allegations that were published in the media, for year after year, as I said to you, this case now runs
23 years.
23 years long. And I know it very well because I've been present in every single one of President Zuma's court appearances. Do you believe under these circumstances President Zuma can still hope for a free and fair trial? Remember, those judges are human beings like you and me. They also sit on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and the Sunday Times. They also read those stories. For years they've been fed all this Stratcom propaganda.
Stratcom propaganda.
There is no chance of a free and fair trial in this matter. And therefore the only just thing that can happen is for this case to be thrown out of court because it has been manipulated, it has been muddied to such an extent that there is no hope at all for President Zuma to get a free and fair trial. And in terms of our constitution and our law, there's a basic litmus test. And that test is, can you have a free and fair trial? And if it is not possible, the case should not go ahead. And in this instance, President Zuma is correct to consistently insist that the matter must be thrown out of court because there is no case,
There's no
and at the same time the matter has been manipulated and interfered to such an extent that President Zuma has no chance to have a proper legal case where his side. So you ask us, when will his side of the story be heard? But the real question is, in what environment, in what context will he be forced to tell his side of the story when the dice is going to be so heavily loaded against him that he cannot have a fair trial?
No.
Then he must never have that trial. That trial must simply just be canned. And that is the only just thing at this stage that can be done. And it better be done because this kind of persecution of President Zuma at this late stage of his life, in his 80s, is terrible.
Very.
And the African National Congress, the role the ANC has played in this whole disastrous affair right from the beginning, is a disgrace.
But they've roped him now to campaign for them.
Well, I
What does
wanted
it
to
tell
come
us?
there.
Why?
You see, for me, this is an abusive relationship.
No.
The ANC abuses, exploits, tramples on President Zuma, and then when they're worried that they're going to lose their majority because they are losing support in KwaZulu-Natal hand over fist, they are going to get a hiding there. When they're worried about that, then they come and knock on President Zuma's door and ask him to support them. It is like an abusive relationship in a marriage.
So they're worried that they're going to lose
Yes,
many votes there.
They know what the
So
statistics.
that's why now they
the
dropped him in.
The research tells them. Now now Beki Mutolo is day and night in front of President Zuma's front door at Nkandla, pleading with President Zuma to campaign for the ANC. Now, for me, the sad thing is they're exploiting President Zuma's huge loyalty to the ANC. He is so deeply loyal to the African National Congress. Remember, he's dedicated his whole life to this organization. Remember, there's this history of memories. When you sit down with President Zuma, he tells you what Oliver Tambo told him, what happened between him and Duma Nokwe, and all of those relationships. So, you know, in his blood, in his bone and his marrow, President Zuma is ANC. He's been shaped by the ANC.
And he'll die being an ANC.
And these ANC people know it. And they exploit it. And I find myself in a situation where I'm disgusted with them. That after everything they've done to President Zuma, they now come and exploit his loyalty to the African National Congress once again. And my call to President Zuma is very clear. Baba,
what is your call to him?
Stop it.
Don't campaign for
Don't
the ANC.
allow these people to continue to abuse you. Don't campaign for the ANC. The ANC that you believe existed in the past as a national liberation movement is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It has been taken over by sellouts, by comprador capitalists, by people who are now the agents of white monopoly capitalism. Don't allow yourself to be abused.
Is he listening?
Stop it.
Is he listening?
I don't know. I will continue to convey my message. I will, of course, always do it with great respect for President Zuma, but I think the message needs to be delivered.
When last did you speak?
It was a couple of weeks ago. As you know, my mum was very ill and she passed on. It meant that for a while I was not able to be as involved and active as I wanted to.
Yeah, I saw the last time you were not at the court.
I couldn't be because we were in the week before my mum's funeral. So President Zuma was appearing, I think, on the Thursday, and on Friday my mum's funeral service was taking place in Mogale City. So I was busy with all those arrangements. Of course, I informed him that I couldn't make it, and I'm sure he fully understood.
Yeah.
But my point is, if I get a chance, and I hope it will be soon, that will be the message that I will deliver to President Zuma.
You'll go
Stop
to Nkandla
it.
to tell him,
please
to
stop supporting the ANC. They don't deserve your support. They are abusing you, and they are not going to change. To hope that the ANC is still going to change and become something else from this sellout organization that it is now is a forlorn hope. It is not going to happen.
Yeah. So what actually is the problem in South Africa? Is it the ANC or is it the establishment and capitalism? What is the major problem here?
Of course, the main enemy is white monopoly capitalism and imperialism. And there's a very good paper written by Professor Chris Malekani, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Wits, in which he says, if you want to understand South Africa and you want to know who you have to fight, you have to identify your main target, your main enemy, as white monopoly capitalism in conjunction with imperialist powers in the United States, mainly in the United Kingdom, but also the rest of Western Europe. In addition to that main problem is the problem that the African National Congress has sold out, that it has allowed itself to be bought by money of white monopoly capitalism and imperialism to now become an agent of those powers, to become what is known as comprador capitalists. That is servant capitalists to the main capitalist power, which is continuing to be in South Africa, white monopoly capitalism. The Johan Ruperts, the Harry Oppenheimers, the Stellenbosch mafia, those are the people with the real power. But the ANC has allowed itself to be now made its handmaiden, to carry out its dirty work, to become its policeman. So if you ask me what is the main problem, white monopoly capitalism. But the ANC is part of that problem, because the ANC has stopped being a national liberation movement. It has now become an agent of that white monopoly capitalism to control the population of South Africa, to abuse the liberation history, to still use the colors of the ANC, the logo of the ANC, to appeal to people's emotions and the warm response that they have to the African National Congress of the past. That one that was a true liberator. But I think the penny has dropped now. I think South Africans finally have realized that these guys are sellouts. And I'm confident that if the progressive left, progressive political parties such as the EFF, the ATM, African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance, the party of which I'm the president, all of those parties, the PAC, all of us can unite.
And form what? An African pack?
Form a united front on the basis of a minority, not a minority, let me rather call it a limited program of action.
Okay.
But a clearly well-defined program of action for radical economic transformation, for the nationalization of the land, for also the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, an end to the privatization of state-owned enterprises, the creation of a state bank that will make cheaper capital available for economic development, especially of small and medium-sized businesses, especially amongst the youth, the black African youth. If such a minimum program of action can be put together under one umbrella organization, including all these political parties, I'm telling you, we're going to show the ANC flames. I'm telling you, under the current circumstances, where the people have seen the ANC for the sellouts that they are, where they're experiencing the failure of service delivery, we are going to give the ANC a hiding that they have never imagined they're going to get.
A run for their money.
Well, we're not just going to give them a run for their money. We're going to beat them. We are going to become the majority with more than 50% of the vote next year. But then, this is the critical part, Muntu, we must be united, united.
Yeah.
And we must be vigilant. We must watch the Independent Electoral Commission, because I don't believe that IEC is
of holding
independent.
free and fair elections.
I'm not sure they're independent. I know that they've got close ties with the ANC and with companies as service providers that are close to the ANC. So this united pact that I'm talking about will also have to make sure that during the whole election process, we have election monitors everywhere. We must unite our resources, we must unite our human power, so that we can keep these people accountable and we can allow the will of the people to count. We can do it, but then we must be united. What these guys are bargaining on, what Cyril Ramaphosa and the sell-out ANC is bargaining on, is that we will be divided, that they will be able to play us off against each other, and they want to have the old divide and rule game. We must take that away from them.
Yeah.
We must be together if we want to achieve this objective that I've just spelled out for you. It is possible. I, together with other leaders of other political parties, are on an almost daily basis talking. We are busy with a process which we hope will deliver this united pact, which must include the economic freedom fighters.
The EFF,
The EFF is central to this plan.
the ATM.
It must include also the ATM, the UDM.
The UDM. Yeah.
It must include ARETA. It must include ACT. It must include the Pan-Africanist Congress and all other progressive forces, as long as we can agree to that minimum program of action that will bring true economic transformation. But Muntu, what is critical is that we must have an economic program of action which is short,
Right.
to the point, clear and easily understood by the public of South Africa with time frames.
Yeah.
So we must be able to, in a realistic way, say to the South African population, we are going to nationalize the land. It will take us, let's say, a year to do that. We are going to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. That is not a difficult job. It can be done by decree of the government, and legislation can be passed within 3 months. We must be able to stop the privatization of our state-owned enterprises immediately.
But it's not happening.
It can be done by the presidential decree. Look what happened in Brazil. Lula, the day when he became president, signed a presidential decree
The Lula moment.
stopping the privatization of state-owned enterprises.
This was a Lula moment.
That was a Lula moment. Now we can make it
Now how?
an RET moment
Absolutely.
in South Africa, and we can do those things, and we can promise our people with time frames how we are going to achieve it.
That's fair enough, Mpangazitha. But on the other side of the coin, yes, I hear you talking about the unity between the ARETA, the EFF, ATM,
Progressive
UDM,
left.
the progressive left. And then on the other side, what do we call it? The progressive right or left. You have
There's no such thing as a progressive right. It's a reactionary right.
a reactionary
You're
right
talking about
of
the
Moonshot.
Moonshot Pact.
Yeah, the Moonshot Pact. Take
That
it through.
thing will implode on its own weight.
Yeah,
You
there's
can
the
see,
DA, the
you can
COPE.
see those parties are already beginning
What is
to
this-
disagree with each other.
What do you think is their objective?
The objective
What is their? What are they hoping to achieve? By
ultimately the objective is to maintain the status quo. And I'm not even sure that the Democratic Alliance just want to be there in the Moonshot Pact. I think ultimately
yeah.
the Democratic Alliance wants to be in an alliance with the ANC. And you've heard that a very significant part of the sell-out leadership of the African National Congress says that they find it an acceptable idea to be in alliance with the DA. You heard what Snooky Zikalala said, that he thinks it's a great idea
It's a great job.
to be in alliance with the Democratic
And
Alliance.
then on the other hand, you had Panyaza saying it is a good idea to go with the EFF.
Well, the EFF will be part of the progressive left alliance in this country. The African National Congress today is almost as right-wing and as reactionary as the DA. In fact, you heard what John Steenhuisen said. When the last State of the Nation address that Cyril Ramaphosa delivered, he was so excited. He was literally jumping up and down. He was waving around the economic policy program of the Democratic Alliance. And he said, Ramaphosa read my program. This is exactly what he announced here in the State of the Nation address. So the ANC and the DA are birds of the same feather. I'm telling you that we will form a progressive left alliance, of which the economic freedom fighters will be part of. The EFF stands for Radical Economic Transformation. The young people who came from the ANC Youth League, who were expelled from the ANC, had as a policy program Radical Economic Transformation. The EFF is a revolutionary, Fanonist and socialist organization. And it will be part of this Radical Economic Left Alliance.
Together with the ATM.
Together with ATM, ARETA,
ARETA,
all of us, we must, I repeat again, the most important objective is that we all come together into one umbrella organization, appear as one on the ballot paper, so that we do not present our voters with a myriad of small parties that they must choose from. We mustn't confuse the voters. We must be clear about who we are. We must be clear about our program of action. We must give the voter a clear, unequivocal, left progressive alternative to the sell-out policies of the ANC and the possibility of a sell-out alliance between the Democratic Alliance and the African National Congress. If we allow the ANC and the DA to continue to govern after the elections next year,
what's going to happen?
We will destroy our country.
If you allow the ANC and the DA to govern.
Or even just the ANC. As I said to you earlier, there's no difference between the ANC and the DA. It is the same thing, same new liberal economic policy program, same imperialist links. So it is critical. It is a watershed moment in the history of this country. We have to get rid of the ANC. We have to keep the ANC and the DA out of power. We need, if we want to save our country and give a future to especially the young black and African people of this country, we need to have a progressive political transformation and a new progressive government in place. That is what I am working for day and night, and what I am working together with the other leaders of progressive political parties in order to achieve. That is the only hope that we have for South Africa. If we allow the ANC to continue, this country will be destroyed. We will be pushed down the abyss, and we will reach the point of no return. So next year is make or break. You know, Muntu, you look at the international world,
Yeah, I wanted to
and
get
you
that quickly.
understand how horrible the situation
It is indeed.
Look what is happening in the Ukraine. Look what is happening
In
with
Gaza.
the Nazis in Ukraine and what they are doing. Look at the kind of NATO encouragement that takes place in Ukraine. The way in which the United States of America is meddling there. The manner in which pressure has been put on the Russian Federation and on President Putin. And then President Putin is being accused of being the warmonger. While the real warmongers are the
Benjamin.
United States of America, are the Nazis in the Ukraine, together with the NATO continuing moving closer and closer to the Russian Federation. Now let's come to Palestine.
Before we
Let's
get
look
there-
at the disaster.
Yeah, let me chip in there with something else, and then you'll say, with the Russian president, President Vladimir Putin, the former KGB boss, all right? There's a warrant of arrest by the ICC, okay? For war crimes. But now, on the other hand, we don't see that happening with the Israel president, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Let's take it even further.
Take it further. Yeah, there's
We
no
don't
warrant.
need to. We don't need to start with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I agree with you
There's
that
no warrant of arrest.
that monster should be the first one.
There's no warrant
who
of
should
arrest
be
from the
given
ICC.
a warrant of arrest by the ICC and
But
should be arraigned in The Hague.
Yeah, but it's not.
But before that, there should have been warrants of arrest for George Bush, for Bill Clinton,
For Tony Blair.
for Tony Blair, for Barack Obama. All of them are war criminals. But nothing had happened against them because the ICC is biased. But look at the disaster that's playing itself out in Palestine. What we see in Palestine is in fact genocide. There is a clear intention by that butcher Netanyahu and his fascist cabinet to now wipe out the Palestinian people. In Gaza, the intention is to drive the Palestinian people off all the land of Gaza
Yeah.
and for Israel to take over all that land in the same way that they have occupied the ancestral land of the Palestinians as a colonial occupying force
Yeah.
over all the years of the last 75 years. So when anyone tells us that the reason why the apartheid fascist Israelis are carpet bombing Gaza
Yeah.
is because of the actions of Hamas on the 7th of October,
Yeah.
it is rubbish.
They say Israel was provoked by Hamas.
You know what?
The whole world was shaken
provocation.
and taken a provocation by Hamas.
Come on, Muntu. Provocation of 75 years.
Of resistance.
Of pushing a people off their land.
Yeah.
Of killing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Go and look at the map of Palestine. What happened since 1948. How the majority of the land was removed from Palestinian ownership and taken over
They're only
by
with 20%,
illegal Israeli colonialism.
illegal occupation.
And even on the 7th of October, the attack that Hamas launched was against an illegal Israeli settlement, occupation of Palestinian land. I am a liberation fighter. I joined Umkhonto we Sizwe when I was 19 years old. I did so because I had to fight the violence of the apartheid system
Yeah.
in South Africa. Now, I believe very strongly that the Palestinian people has exactly that same right that I had to fight for the freedom of Palestine, like the African National Congress when it was still a liberation movement, and yes, Umkhonto we Sizwe was fighting for the liberation of the people of South Africa against apartheid.
It was called a terrorism.
Well, we were not terrorists.
They
and
said
in the
so.
same, well, that's
Like
the
what they are saying
nonsense
now
they talk. The
with
same
Hamas.
propaganda
With
nonsense.
Hamas, yeah.
They talk against Hamas. And they talk against the
Hezbollah.
people, Hezbollah, and the people of Palestine who are fighting for their liberation. The people of Palestine has a legal right, international legal right, also in terms of the various resolutions of the United Nations, to take up arms against the apartheid state of Israel. Their war against apartheid Israel is legitimate, and we in South Africa should support it. If this South African government had any backbone, had any guts, it would have immediately gotten rid
of the
of the Israeli
Israeli
embassy here in South Africa. It would have severed all diplomatic ties
How can they do
with,
that while
with Israel, and it
They are
would have armed Hezbollah and Hamas. And I'm very happy that when we were in front of that illegal Israeli embassy in Pretoria on Monday, both myself and Comrade Julius Malema said, if we manage to do what I spoke to you earlier about creating this united left progressive movement, and if we take over the government next year, The progressive new South African government must arm Hamas and must arm Hezbollah so that they can truly fight for the liberation of the people of Palestine. You know what is disgusting, Muntu? While the South African government says it is supposedly in favor of the Palestinian people, I want to read to you something that I came upon just now. And that is, South Africa is going to host on the 2nd to the 4th of November in fact, they're going to co-host the United States of America's African Growth and Opportunity Forum
AGOA
here in South Africa. Now, that means that President Biden or other senior representatives of President Biden are going to come here to South Africa, are going to be hosted, warmly received, wined and dined by President Ramaphosa, while the United States of America is central to the genocide that is taking place in Palestine right now. That is disgusting. That the South African government, while it says it is supposedly with the people of Palestine, can receive the President and senior members of the government of the United States of America that is co-responsible for the genocide and the war crimes that are taking place in Gaza and in Palestine overall today, is an aberration. And we must call, all of us as South Africans who are truly concerned about the future of our country, our right to international solidarity, and our support for the Palestinian people, we must call for that meeting not to happen. It must be boycotted, and I call now for all the progressive forces, all the progressive political parties and also civil society organizations to protest against that gathering, to picket there and in fact make it impossible for that gathering to continue, because it will be a gathering of shame on South African soil as an insult to the suffering, to the killings, to the disaster that has befallen the people of Palestine.
Comrade Carl, I must really thank you. You've said it mouthfully.
Thank you.
And this is how we come to the end of our conversation. Mamero Mudle, there we go. There you have it. That's the president of ARETA, African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance. That's Comrade Carl Mpangazitga Niehaus. What's your final message to the voters next year?
All of you who are eligible to vote, make sure that you register. Once you are registered, make sure that you're going to vote for this United Left Progressive Alliance that is going to challenge the sell-out African National Congress, the sell-out DA, the sell-out Moon Pact. Make sure next year that there will be a progressive, radical economic transformation government in South Africa to save all of us, to bring about a true transformation of the economy, and to restore our dignity in the international terrain, and make sure that we will act in line with what is true morality, and that is support for the people of Palestine, support for the progressive forces, support for BRICS, support for a multipolar world where we will get rid of the domination of imperialism and the evil United States of America regime.
South Africa, that's how we come to the end of it. Until next time, thank you very much, Comrade Carl Niehaus. Until next time, Mama, have yourself a great week. We thought maybe tomorrow might be a public holiday. You're not sure.
Well, I'm not even advocating for it, but thanks so much, Muntu, for the opportunity and also thanks that I can tell, especially to the people of Alexandra. As you know, I've got a very, very strong bond
Absolutely.
with Alex.
Yeah.
This is where I've cut my political teeth.
Aha, you've nailed it. Anyway, thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you.
Have a great one. Mamero Motle, this is how we come to the end of it, and a very special thanks there to Carl and to the crew as well. Thank you, guys.